change the unconscious incompetence, conscious incompetence, conscious competence, unconscious competence. We change that to functional dysfunction. And so when we learn a new habit, a new trick, when we learn to adapt to a new situation and we develop the competency, we're going to call that conscious function. Coping mechanisms appear capable of dealing with the challenges and opportunities, and we're celebrating and we're creating. We're on the roll. Life feels good. We're in control of things. The emotion is one of joyful experience. Very quickly, this marvelous brain of ours will habituate to the learning, and it becomes a habit. And so as soon as we get to the habit, it becomes unconscious function, a good habit. And what characterizes that is we can be present in a different kind of way whilst we're doing what we're having to do. We've got a new quality of perception. We can draw on tuition. We need to process, flex, flow, adapt. It's a wonderful space of just knowing how to be, knowing how to flow. From the Taoist perspective, it's in the Tao. It's the Wu way, flowing like water. And it's a glorious place to be. It's the place of expertise. But in an increasingly dynamic world, the dynamic outer environment, if we make a distinction, which is very controversial about inner and outer, but let's use that just to think about, this is so dynamic, what was working habitually can very quickly be no longer appropriate, no longer functional, and it can become unconscious dysfunction. So a good habit can very quickly become a bad habit if there's a change in the context. We from South Africa, we experienced this fundamentally when there was the changeover that you spoke about, Jan, from the apartheid regime to a new regime, and still struggling, because whole sections of the population on all sides are still functioning in a habituated way that they grew up in a new context. And the turbulence and the distress and the anger and the frustration, all of that is an expression of that change. And so what characterizes unconscious dysfunctional is that we tend to be thinking in future past. What are we going to do and where did it come from? We're not present. We're locked into the old paradigm and we're trying to fit the new into the old paradigm. Old wine in new skins comes from the Bible kind of stuff. And so what we tend to do then, the problem space or our discomfort is projected into the world. Projection. It's out there. Not me, it's out there. It's the system, it's my boss, it's the administration, it's the government, and for fundamentalists, it's the devil. What we then tend to do, we go into superstition, we objectifying things, and it's the denial story, it's resistance, we're trying to control, and there's arrogance, there's despair. We tend to apportion blame. We want to find a scapegoat. It's Boris Johnson, or it's Donald Trump, or whoever it is. We try to pin the blame. But ultimately what that results in is that we are operating from a space of victim, a helpless space. And there's an emotional feeling, there's an emotional energy that comes along with that. We say that emotion is energy seeking purpose. Whether it's anger, fear, despair, aversion, disappointment, it's energy that's actually wanting to do work. And so understanding those emotions, that energy is going to be very much part of what we're going to be exploring today. And then when this has become painful, sufficiently painful, a dawning starts happening. Oh my goodness me, do I have something to do with this? Have I got some kind of a role that I'm playing in this situation that doesn't work? Is it my attitude, is it my behaviors, my responses? And so there is a very, very uncomfortable interface between unconscious dysfunctional and conscious dysfunctional. And it's unconscious because the ego is challenged. because I've got to make certain admissions that I don't know. And that requires a very particular quality of leadership, which is nurturing. It requires a sensitivity, particularly in times of change. And so what characterizes this is that we recognize that our coping mechanisms are inadequate. And the stress and the confusion then becomes the signals that something's not working and I've got to do something about that personally. And so what the breakthrough space is the acceptance I have a role to play in this, and I might need to get some help in this, the capacity to reach out. That's the breakthrough space.